Welcome, curious minds and history buffs, to a tale so shrouded in mystery and intrigue that even 2 centuries later, we can't help but wonder, what really happened during Napoleon's last days on the secluded island of Saint Helena? We're peeling back the layers of a narrative so profound, that it's like ripping open a time capsule buried deep beneath the sands of history. Now, if you've ever pondered the enigma of one of history's most talked about individuals, then stay tuned. You're about to uncover secrets and speculative theories that could rival any spy novel. Napoleon Bonaparte, his name is an incantation that conjures images of spectacular battlefield triumphs, grand palaces, and a European continent reshaped by the force of his will. This was a man who rode the whirlwinds of history, who commanded legions with a mere flick of his hand, and whose dreams were as expansive as the horizons he sought to conquer. A military maestro, a political prodigy, and the architect of an empire that stretched from the frosty steppes of Russia to the sun-kissed lands of Spain. He was an emperor adorned in sumptuous robes, standing in grand ballrooms where chandeliers dripped with opulence. But the luminosity of those days would fade into the dusk of a life spent in exile, in a place as bleak as his former life had been brilliant. Can you feel the sheer poignancy of it all? This was a Shakespearean tragedy played out on the world stage, a man who defied gods and monarchs to touch the face of glory, only to stumble, to plummet, to be consumed by the very flames that had once illuminated his path to greatness. So how did this man, a human enigma wrapped in the tricolor of revolution, end up on a forsaken island, his ambitions dashed upon its rocky shores? Ah, Waterloo, that name which resounds like a death knell through the annals of history. Waterloo, the battle that turned the tide, the place where fate delivered its scathing verdict on Napoleon's grandiose dreams. Imagine a battlefield drenched in the ink of impending doom, where every musket shot spelled out a letter of the epitaph for an empire. The European theater, which had for so long reveled in the tragicomedy penned by Napoleon's audacious exploits, was now ready for the final act, the closing scene, the ultimate curtain call. In that moment, the spotlight dimmed, and the leading man was left to face the end of an era. The British, those eternal arch-nemeses, stewards of an empire where the sun never set, had finally grown weary of his shenanigans. In a blend of exasperation and triumph, they decided to confine him to an island so remote, so completely severed from the fabric of civilization, that it makes Alcatraz appear like a bustling metropolis. Picture an exile so isolating, that even the relentless waves crashing against the island's cliffs seem to whisper, "Here lies the end of the man who would be a legend, marooned in an ocean of obscurity." Ah, the contrasts! The seismic shifts in fortune. From the resplendence of palaces to the gloom of Longwood House, from the cheers of triumphant soldiers to the stifling silence of Saint Helena. It's a tale that beckons us to contemplate the ephemeral nature of power, the fickle hand of fate, and the irrevocable passage of time that waits for no one, not even for the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte. Longwood House. Let's dwell on that name for a moment, shall we? It conjures images of grandeur, perhaps an English estate resplendent with sprawling gardens and ornate chambers. But here lies one of history's most biting ironies. Longwood was no palace, it was a prison dressed in the guise of a residence. Nestled amid an almost ceaseless fog that rolled in from the sea, Longwood House was like a stage set for a Gothic novel, dank, forlorn, and teeming with rats that would have given the Pied Piper a run for his money. Dampness seeped through the walls like an ever-encroaching melancholy, and the very air seemed thick with a sense of impending doom. Imagine Napoleon, the orchestrator of sweeping symphonies of battle, the man who once mingled with queens and dignitaries, now pacing the worn, creaky floorboards of this derelict house. If you were to script this as fiction, readers would say it's too extravagant, too implausible. Yet, history often serves up irony more potent than any dramatist could conceive. But wait, there's more to this fascinating tableau of despair. Even in these twilight moments, even at the nadir of his life, Napoleon was not a solitary sufferer. Enter the Entourage, a band of fiercely loyal followers who opted for self-imposed exile over the comforts of European civilization. These were generals, aides, and confidants, people whose lives had become irrevocably intertwined with the emperor's meteoric rise and catastrophic fall. Together, they inhabited this isolated realm like characters from Dante's Inferno, forever bound to the fortunes, or shall we say, misfortunes, of their larger-than-life leader. This was a community of the damned, welded together by the surreal circumstance of living next door to the most famous exile in the world. Picture it, communal meals featuring dull conversations, aimless walks around the limited boundaries of their world, and an ever-ticking clock that reminded everyone of the passage of time and the unavoidable decay it brought with it. And, how could we overlook the massive, glaring, unspoken elephant in the room? Napoleon's health, deteriorating at a rate as rapid as his past conquests, became the hushed subplot to every interaction. The man who had once seemed invincible on the battlefield, who had stood tall against the typhoons of politics and war, was now frail, feeble, and utterly human. Day after day, as his entourage engaged in the banalities of daily life, the conversations grew softer, the silences longer, and the air thickened with the weight of the unutterable question: what happens when an unstoppable force meets the immovable object of mortality? Longwood House and its peculiar society of exiles, what a microcosm of the human condition they were. Each person grapples with their loyalty, their choices, and their own fleeting mortality, all under the ever-present shadow of Napoleon's impending demise. It's a chapter of history so rich in texture, so laden with layers of emotion and irony, that it calls us to ponder not just the life of a singular man, but the very essence of human vulnerability and resilience. As we edge closer to the crescendo of this labyrinthine narrative, let's pause and steep ourselves in the intensely human drama that was Saint Helena during those dwindling days. This is the tableau, an emperor disrobed of his glory, a man who had once envisioned a world swathed in the French tricolor, now confined to a speck of land in the vast Atlantic. No more rapturous cheers from adoring crowds, no more war councils, and certainly no more conquests. Instead, his days had been pared down to a monotonous litany of activities that could hardly compete with his former life's frenetic pace. Imagine, if you will, Napoleon on his long, introspective walks, meandering through the restricted landscapes available to him, probably lost in thought. What might he have pondered on those strolls? One can almost see him walking, head slightly bowed, eyes fixed on some distant point as he wrestled with the demons and angels of his past actions. Was he replaying the jubilant moments of his meteoric rise, or the crushing disappointments of his fall? Did he see visions of Austerlitz and Jena, or was he haunted by the specters of Moscow and Waterloo? And the memoirs? Those laborious, endless hours spent dictating the story of his life, ensuring his narrative, his version of events, would live on. In this act of recounting, was he trying to justify his choices, vindicate his actions, or perhaps reclaim some semblance of the monumental legacy that seemed to be slipping through his fingers like grains of sand? These were no ordinary memoirs, they were the last testament of a man who had once ruled an empire, a valedictory narrative of his place in the annals of history. Then, consider those deep, soul-searching conversations with his entourage, those nocturnal councils where they would dissect world events, debate philosophy, and ponder existential questions. In the flickering candlelight of Longwood House, did Napoleon bear the countenance of a man plagued with regret? Did his eyes glimmer with contrition, or did they burn with an ember of unresolved resentment, a glimmer of unextinguished ambition? We plunge into the realm of speculation, of conjecture, for the man himself left no definitive clues. Was Napoleon penitent, standing on that jagged line between remorse and defiance? Did he ruminate over the audacity that led him to incredible heights and then dropped him into the chasm of defeat? Or did he simmer, even boil, in a cauldron of resentment, cursing the fates, the alliances, and perhaps even the betrayals that snuffed out his blazing star? The inner landscape of Napoleon during those Saint Helena years is an enigma, a vast, uncharted territory that historians, psychologists, and armchair philosophers have ventured into but have never entirely mapped. We may read the memoirs, peruse the letters, and consider the accounts of those who shared his exile, but the deepest recesses of Napoleon's mind remain a tantalizing mystery. It's a space rife with questions that compel us, not merely as students of history but as fellow human beings, to ponder the complexities, the frailties, and the inscrutable depths of the human soul. Let's dispel the notion that Napoleon's final years were squandered in idle despair or wistful nostalgia. Far from it. Even as he trod the boundaries of his restricted world, He was marshalling his forces for a final, monumental campaign. No, this was not a war to be waged on the sweeping plains of Europe, nor a contest for crowns, thrones, or dominions. This was a campaign for something far more elusive, far more enduring, his very legacy, his immortal place in the annals of human history. The Memoirs. These were not mere reminiscences or self-indulgent chronicles. Each word dictated to his enthralled scribes was a calculated stroke in a grand tapestry he was weaving, a historical painting where he was both the artist and the muse. Napoleon, the master strategist, was deploying syntax and semantics as skillfully as he once deployed cavalry and artillery. He was crafting a narrative to outlive him, to echo in the halls of academia, to be debated in cafes and parlors, to be analyzed, dissected, and perhaps even revered by generations yet unborn. And ponder, if you will, on the profundities that likely consumed him in the silence of his solitude. Glory, as he had learned, was as fleeting as the morning dew, evaporating in the harsh light of reality. Yet, legacy, that was the hard currency of history, a treasure that could withstand the corroding test of time. He knew the truism, history is often penned by the victors, and he had not emerged victorious. But if anyone could break that mold, could defy that maxim, it would be Napoleon. He aspired to be the exception to the rule, the paradox that scholars would puzzle over for centuries to come. Imagine him, sitting in his Spartan chamber in Longwood House, encircled by books, maps, and memories, contemplating this final battle. In a world that had disowned him, on an island that felt like a floating prison, he plotted his last grand strategy, not with battalions and generals, but with ink, paper, and the indomitable force of his own recollection and reflection. So here we find him, in the dreary exile of Saint Helena, executing a campaign more cerebral, yet no less impactful, than any he had undertaken in his heyday. The battleground had shifted from the physical geography of continents to the intellectual terrain of human consciousness. Napoleon, broken but not bowed, was crafting his swan song, laying down the foundations for his posthumous resurgence, ensuring that even if his empire had crumbled, his story, his carefully crafted, defiant narrative, would endure. The genius of the man extended beyond military campaigns to a deep understanding of human psychology and the capricious nature of historical memory. In an existence now confined by both walls and circumstance, Napoleon still aspired to soar, on the wings of words, through the corridors of time, to a destiny that would vindicate his tumultuous journey through life. It was a final act of audacity, a concluding chapter in a life story that had known no bounds. Now we arrive at the grand finale, the mysterious curtain call of the man who had defied fate time and again, Napoleon's enigmatic demise. The official tale, the one chronicled in history books and recited like a rehearsed line in a well-worn play, claims that stomach cancer was the ultimate adversary that brought the great general to his knees. But let's face it, we're not here to regurgitate official stories, are we? No, my friends, we are explorers in the realm of possibility, the seekers of questions that shimmer in the dark corners of history. Did you know, prepare yourself for a morsel of intrigue, that post-mortem examinations of Napoleon's hair revealed astonishingly elevated levels of arsenic? Arsenic, a substance notorious as the poisoner's weapon of choice throughout history. So, what does that mean? Could it be that someone wanted to hasten his exit from the mortal stage? If so, who could it be? A disgruntled retainer, perhaps? Or was it a compassionate loyalist who could no longer bear to see their emperor writhe in agony? But the most tantalizing question of all circles around the British. Could they, the captors, the arbiters of his fate, have had a clandestine hand in Napoleon's death? The mere thought sends a shiver down the spine, doesn't it? Imagine the delicious irony, after confining him to an island, far removed from the power centers of the world, they would have the audacity to steal away even his ability to die on his own terms. Could this be the final, dark chapter in the annals of Anglo-French animosity? The theories around Napoleon's death are as numerous as stars twinkling in the night sky, each beckoning us with its own glimmer of possibility. Some have even suggested that it wasn't murder but accidental arsenic exposure from the wallpaper in Longwood House. Oh, how history delights in baffling us with its myriad enigmas. As you see, the answers are not forthcoming. They tease us, dance around us like will-o'-the-wisps, inviting us to plunge deeper into the labyrinth of history, of human frailties and perhaps, dark intentions. The true cause of Napoleon's death is like an elusive phantom, always just out of reach, always shrouded in a diaphanous veil of supposition and contradiction. So, as we conclude this epic voyage through Napoleon's last years, we're left with more questions than answers. And perhaps that's fitting. After all, the man himself was a riddle, a paradox, an enigma wrapped in the trappings of power and vulnerability. Could we expect his final exit to be any less mysterious? I think not. The denouement of this grand operatic spectacle that was Napoleon Bonaparte's life came to pass on the 5th day of May 1821. A date etched in the annals of history, a date that marks the extinguishing of one of the brightest, albeit controversial, flames ever to light up the world stage. Whether by the inexorable march of natural causes or by the intricate machinations of faceless men lurking in the shadowy recesses of geopolitics, Napoleon took his final bow and exited this mortal drama. Now, consider the layers of tragic dignity that enshrouded this moment, like the final chord of a symphony, resonant with a complexity of tones. It was a death that rang true to the themes of his life, a life filled with dizzying ascents to the pinnacles of glory and harrowing descents into the unfathomable depths of despair. Here was a man of boundless ambition, a man who broke the mold, shattered ceilings, and rewrote the rules, yet a man equally burdened with flaws as grand as his virtues. Imperious in his quest for power, and yet vulnerable in his humanity, his story had been a kaleidoscope of contradictions. This was not the hurried death of a young soldier on the battlefield, nor the shameful execution of a discredited leader. It was, instead, a departure steeped in the tragic dignity that befits an emperor, even an emperor in exile. One can almost picture him, lying on his deathbed in that modest room, perhaps contemplating the fleeting empires of this world as he prepared to enter the next. It's a scene of such Shakespearean gravitas, one of grandiosity deflated, yet honor somehow preserved. He had clawed his way up from Corsican obscurity to stand atop the highest echelons of global power. He had captivated and horrified Europe in equal measure. And now, he found himself laid low, not by a coalition of armies, but possibly by something as ignoble as a diseased organ or as treacherous as a dose of poison. Whether betrayed by his own failing body, or by those who feared what he still represented even in his weakened state, he met his end with an enigmatic poise that leaves us still puzzling over the man more than 2 centuries later. So, as we close the book on Napoleon Bonaparte, we find ourselves grappling with a death as mysterious, as nuanced, and as deeply textured as the life that preceded it. It was an exit that harmonized perfectly with the symphonic cacophony of his life's journey, from the meteoric rises to the cataclysmic falls. And in that final act, we see encapsulated the essence of Napoleon, a man whose life was a fusion of the sublime and the tragic, a man who, for better or worse, left an indelible mark upon the canvas of history. The story of Napoleon is not merely a tale, it's a vast, intricate tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and shades of darkness. And as we ponder the mystery shrouding his final moments, we are reminded that some enigmas are destined to captivate us forever. It's a tale that demands to be told, a riddle begging to be solved, and a historical enigma that continues to fascinate us to this day. What do you think happened to Napoleon in his final days in Saint Helena? Do you buy into the conspiracy theories, or do you think that, in the end, even the greatest of men are humbled by the unyielding march of time and the cruel inevitability of mortality? If you enjoyed this roller coaster through the foggy mists of history, make sure you hit that like button. And for more captivating historical enigmas, stunning mysteries, and mind-blowing revelations, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep the wheels of time turning.